All right, thank you. Welcome everyone to Coffee and Connections. My name is Tanya Whiteside and I am the Vision Catalyst for the Whiteside Group. And today I am so honored and happy to have our guest, Shelbi Titus-Walker, who will be sharing with us today. And I just know that it'll be a great conversation. And I want to read some things about Shelbi. Shelbi is the founder and CEO of GRAITH Foundation and the co-owner of Circle Square Services, which is a publishing company in California. Now, with over 20 years of professional genealogist and family history researcher, she has reunited, researched, and solved over 1,500 cases for adult adoptees in search of their birth families and birth families in search of the children they placed. Shelbi has been called upon to speak and conduct seminars for hundreds of organizations. And for 3 seasons, Shelbi was a researcher for TLC's Long Lost Family and is currently the host of TLC's My DNA Mystery and the co-host of The Triad, which is a podcast that's dedicated to providing a forum for all members in the triad of adoption. Shelbi is the heart and soul of the GRAITH Foundation family. When she isn't researching families, she's also an author and recently penned her first novel, Shelter in the Sun, a love story. She attended Fisk University and holds a Bachelor of Arts from SUNY, a Master of Science from California State University, Dominguez Hills, and Juris Doctorate from Trinity Law School. She's a member of the Links Incorporated, Orange County, California chapter, and, I know how to say this, Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. She's a child of God, and she and her husband Byron are the parents of 3 beautiful daughters, Keisha, Bethany, and Olivia. Let's welcome Shelbi. So Shelbi, how did we get here? Tell us about a little bit about your story, your history, and how you got to where you are right now, doing the work that you're doing.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. This is really fun. I see a lot of familiar faces, and it makes me very happy to see my Link sisters here and friends, and I'm really happy to be here. But my journey in genealogy actually started in 5th grade. Though I didn't have the vocabulary, I didn't have that word in my mind, I was sitting in Miss Martin's class, who's still a very dear friend of mine, and she had the black and white civil rights movies on. And I come from a predominantly diverse community, but predominantly Caucasian community, and it's always an uncomfortable feeling sitting with the civil rights movies playing with your classmates and whatnot. And so I was watching the movies, and you would see a scene, for example, from the Edmund Pettus Bridge, Bloody Sunday. And then it would cut to a scene of Martin Luther King having the I Have a Dream speech, or it would talk about Rosa Parks, or there'd be a discussion with John Lewis. And I was never interested in their stories because I knew their stories. My parents gave me the gift, and my sisters the gift of education about ourselves and our history. So I knew how their stories ended. What I did not know was the lady in the white dress who had the water sprayed on her. I wanted to know who she was. I wanted to know who the man who was attacked by the dog, who's he? What's his name? And so for whatever reason, it just sparked my interest in backstories. I always wanted to know who people were and who they came from. And I didn't have the genealogy word in my vocabulary, but that's where it started. Fast forward throughout my life, even working for the feds, prosecuting cases for 10 years, I never was really concerned about the crimes that the defendants committed. I always wanted to know how they got there, because no one looks into a crib and says, I can't wait for my son or daughter to be a defendant. And so there's always a backstory. And so that's what piqued my interest in genealogy.
Wow, that is so interesting.
It took me a while to get there, to figure out where that came from, because obviously in 5th grade I'm not thinking 49, this is where you're going to be. But I had to sit down and kind of harken back where this drive and this hunger came from, and I think that's where it started.
Right. Now, I, of course, have a question about DNA and knowing your history and knowing your roots. Why do you think it is that people don't want to find out more about their family, lineage and history, or if there's anyone out there. I heard that I'm from Africa. I don't know for sure. And I think I mentioned that I have an aunt, Emma. She passed away recently. She passed at 109. And I really wanted to know family history.
Yeah.
She told me, she literally said, "You're about a nosy thing." I would ask a lot of questions, and I don't know why she didn't want to share. I don't know that part of the family history. She lived in Hopkinsville, Kentucky.
Yeah.
But there were just things that she didn't want to share with me.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, in your experience and your knowledge of what you know, why is it people don't want to know or don't want to share?
I think it's because the past can sometimes be painful, particularly for African Americans. Our story is complicated and oftentimes tragic. And so when we were able to not remember, we kind of moved on up like the Jeffersons and forgot our past. And what happens when we do that is we forget our past. And our children don't have any footing. There's a painting in my house that my children did, and it is a layer of about 10 people, 10 figures, and then there's 9, and then there's 8, and it ultimately gets to 1. And they did that painting because I wanted them to understand that you stand on these big, bold black shoulders, that you are not just an island or an anomaly, and all of the details and even the tragedies have shaped us all to who we are. And so I think a lot for the older generation, it's difficult to share the hardship. But I think it's necessary because it gives us a sound footing. But for those tragedies, but for that hard part, we couldn't be what we're doing and who we are now. So I think that's the reason why they don't want to. But there's richness in doing so. And if you haven't studied your family history, I encourage everyone to do it. I'm about to blow a gasket because a face just walked in that just blows my mind. But suffice it to say, it's really important that we understand who we come from. And every single person, I say to my clients all the time, every person deserves to know who they come from. So you've got to get those stories. You've got to capture those stories.
Is there a difference on the organization or the program? Like, I'm familiar with 23andMe, Ancestry.com. Is there a difference in any one of those organizations?
So for my purposes, there is a difference. It really is born out of what your desires are. If you want to know about your family history, I would encourage everyone to do an ancestry DNA test. Why? Because they have the greatest number of usership. Your DNA is only compared to other people. In other words, I can't look into a microscope and see you, but I can't determine what you are based upon those strands of DNA. But compared to mine, we can figure out who one another is. And so with Ancestry, there's about 12 to 15 million members, and you compare. And the very inception of Ancestry, it was really difficult to determine ethnicity. It would be very broad brushstrokes. You'd be like, you're African or you're European. Well, what does that really mean? So when more people started using, you drill it down even further, that you're Irish or you're West African or you're Senegalese and so that's what's really helpful, using that database or that testing site to help you identify ethnicity and perhaps connect you with a cousin or 2 or 5 or 22 or 1,000. 23andMe does the same thing, different usership. And so if I'm working with a birth client, a client who's looking for their biological families, I encourage them to do both. Why? Because your biological mother may have tested on 23andMe and not on Ancestry, or vice versa. Or your cousin may test on 23andMe and not on Ancestry. And for the purposes of my birth clients, it's to identify family. So I encourage them to do both. 23andMe has about 12 million users. So sometimes there's duplicates from Ancestry and 23andMe, sometimes not. But when I'm working with somebody who's looking for their family, I need to shoot a big, broad scope so that I can see who's connected to them. So I think the distinction really is about usership from that purpose. 23andMe does a good job of identifying like traits, historic traits, health traits, things like that. Ancestry, not so much. It's not what they're good at. They're more about the genealogical piece.
So it's good to do both. I like that.
And even for people who are searching out just building their own family trees, if you're looking for the more deep dive into your family history, it's really good to do both. For African Americans, I'm going to encourage you to do African Ancestry, which is an entire testing site. It's owned and run by an African American woman named Gina Page, who's a dear friend of mine. And she started it because our history is lost in the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. It's somewhere like a table from college. You don't know where it is because we were property. This drills you down to the tribe in which your people come from, which for a lot of African Americans, it's detached. We are Americans, yes, but we know we have a lineage elsewhere. African ancestry tests tribes in Africa and associates you with your tribe, which gives you what? Language, culture, faith. It connects you to the motherland, which is something that we just have not been able to do before. So her company is extraordinary.
Wow. I didn't even know that exists. Okay. African ancestry, I'll do that. Now, you are the host of the show, My DNA Mystery.
I am.
And I saw the episode. Did anybody see the episode on TLC? And I think the person that just came in was the star of that episode.
She's the subject.
LC. Can you tell us about that experience? Because I know it was all about her wanting to know her father, and you kind of followed her story and these three gentlemen, and you kind of went through that process. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's why I was about to blow gas, because I haven't seen Mariah in a long time. And so it's really emotional for her to be here. Our connection is not in front of the camera. And when I got the opportunity to host the television show, it actually was born out of Long Lost Family. And when I was doing research for Long Lost Family, many of my updates had to be done on video. And I don't know how it really happened, but Long Lost Family was a show that was helping adult adoptees find their birth families, and I did all the research, and so Howard Lee, who was the president of TLC, apparently saw me and liked me for whatever reason and thought I'd be good to host this show. And when I first got the opportunity, I thought it was a research position. I'm really good behind the scenes. In front of the scenes, it kind of freaked me out a little bit. And so when they offered it to me, I thought it was just going to be doing research. Little did I know, I would be in front of the camera. And one Thursday, I got to meet this beautiful woman who's in the back here, and to learn all about what her story was. And I didn't know the totality or the depth and breadth of Mariah's story, but we've become friends and family, and much of our experience with one another, again, it's not on the camera. What you saw on television was very, very real. But the realest parts, you didn't get a chance to see. It didn't make the cut. And so it was an honor to share with her in that moment and to kind of foster all the things we had to do to get her to the point where she learned who her birth father was.
I thought it was, I was all into the episode, and I know I cried at the end because I was hoping with her who her father was going to be and everything. But in doing that type of work, have you come up against challenges of where the other side didn't want to participate?
Yeah. So I've done 1,600, almost 1,700 cases in finding birth families. And not every story ties up in a nice little bow, including this one. Life is life, and people are people, and humanity is just humanity. And I talked a little about earlier about how the past can sometimes be painful. There's no shortage of that in these stories as well. People are met, you meet them where they are, and they're met with these challenges when you find them. And I always tell my clients, your mom's not Oprah, calm down. She's just a normal lady. We don't know what her story is. We don't know what his story is. And you may be accepted, you may not be accepted, but it doesn't define you as a person. Because you just didn't have a dog in the fight, right? These decisions were made before you even came into existence. And so it's not personal. And so, yeah, we've been met with a lot of cases where there's just not an acceptance on the other end. And truthfully, my work is a marathon and not a sprint. I have clients that I've had cases from 10 years ago, 5 years ago, and every single moment I see them, every time I talk to them, there's a new evolution. A birth, a death, a friend, like there's always something that's happening. And so it's not a one-off experience. I'm always mentoring and counseling and consulting with, because these are real lives we're talking about.
Right. And you mentioned 10 years.
Yeah.
Do you have clients that will say, I'm going to do this until we do it, or do you have some that will say, you know what, that's it, it's been long enough, I don't want to do this anymore?
So my longest case I just solved, it took 2 years to solve. And it was the most frustrating case, and it's one of those cases where everything was right in front of us, we just couldn't see it. And I believe in the divinity of our work, that when God says it's time, it's time. And so one day we open it up and bing, bang, boom, all things happen and he's able to find his birth family. That's the longest case I've ever had in my caseload. The shortest find was 90 minutes. A woman who'd been looking for 35 years. I found her father in 90 minutes.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty amazing. So, but the relationship with my clients is long lasting. I started this work 22 years ago, and my best friend was my first client. She's now a grandmother. She was an adoptee who was in search of her biological family, and we found them in 10 hours. This is when there was no Google. It was Yahoo and classmates.com when you didn't have to pay for it, whereas those are yearbooks. Crazy. And we found them in 10 hours. Well, now my client was a mother, became a mother, and now she's a grandmother, and there are still challenges because there's deaths and births, and who calls what, and where do you go, and where's Christmas going to be, and all of those things. And so we're constantly counseling and consulting and learning, really, the process.
And is that the foundation of the GRAITH foundation that you have? Can you tell us a little bit?
Yeah. So GRAITH, GRAITH, are the mix of my twin daughters, Grace, and their names are Bethany Faith and Olivia Grace. So Grace and Faith. That's where GRAITH Foundation came from, because it's where grace and faith come together. You have to have both in order to do this work. And so that's where the name was born out of. My children, ironically, and maybe divinely, are adopted as well. I did this work far before their adoption. They're 14, so 6 years prior to adoption, I was doing this work. And I really believe it's God's way of being really kind of tongue-in-cheek and kind of funny, because they'll never need my services. They know who they come from, and that's purposeful for us, for my husband and I.
That is awesome.
Yeah.
I also saw that you're very active with the Links.
Yes.
You're also part of a sorority. Does all of your work kind of go together?
So here's the interesting thing. It's funny that we're having this conversation and connection, because that's everything that I do is connecting. It's connecting one to themselves or one to another. That's all I do. Whether it's writing a book or doing genealogical work or helping someone ghostwrite or helping someone publish, it is literally about connecting one to oneself or one to someone else. I think that's what's missing in our country. We are so detached, and everyone feels like they're an island and their story is the only one that's ever been told. And if we do a better job of telling each other our stories, we realize that we're more connected than we are disconnected. It's kind of crazy when I do this work. It's difficult to hate when you do genealogical work, because I see everyone in my family. You'll see everyone in your family. And if you realize that the blood that runs through your veins is not just one singular drop, it's difficult to hate. And the stories that are intertwined within our family trees are extraordinary. So, yeah, I think everything for me is about connection. That's all it is. And I try every single day to help people connect with their better selves, their best selves, and for the best for someone else.
Is there a story or a memory that you have, like the most memorable one that just, I mean, I know you have a lot.
I do.
But one in particular you could share with us?
So one I will share with you. He's written a book, actually. He wrote a book called Sold. And his name is Reverend Billy Williams. And Billy came to me at 46 years old. If you saw Billy, you wouldn't know what he is. You wouldn't know if he was white, if he's black. You don't know what he's nondescript. He's a big guy, tall, big guy. And he came to me and he says, listen, I'm looking for my birth family. Okay. So he was raised by an African-American family in Los Angeles, a very prominent African-American family. His father was a teamster. His mother was a stay-at-home mom. His parents died, and he thought that the people who raised him were his biological parents. When he went to go clean out his mother's house, he found a birth certificate with a hybrid of his name and the name of someone else on his birth certificate. So imagine the anger, frustration, and wonder, because he has no one to ask the question of, like, what's this? So he goes to his mother's best friend. Mother's best friend says, have a seat, I got something I need to tell you. Long story short, Billy's biological mother was a white woman who had 4 other children by her husband. She and her husband divorced. She ends up having a relationship with an African-American man, and bing, bang, boom, here comes Billy. She raises him until 18 months, and when she wants to go back home to West Virginia, where her family is, they say, you can bring the white ones, but you gotta leave that black one there. And he's 18 months old. So it's not like he's infantile. He's 18 months old, and he has older brothers. How they came to be, how the connection between his adopted family and Billy came to be, I don't know. No one really will ever know. Suffice it to say, the friend of his mother says she and his mom went to a Vegas hotel room, the adjoining rooms, where there's a single door and there's one room on one side, one room on the other.
Yeah.
Attorney was on one side, mom and friend are on another side. Some papers are exchanged. Attorney goes back into one room, comes back out with some more papers. Mom reaches in her bag with $10,000 in cash, takes the cash to the other room, brings baby over. Baby goes in mom's lap, and Billy goes and lives his life. He was sold for $10,000.
Wow.
And in his book, he talks about what that feels like to be sold, to be currency, basically, to be a product. And when we found his birth mother, she actually was still living. She was a minister as well, which is ironic. But she never was able to bring herself to meet him because shame is a very powerful drug. How do you stand up in front of a congregation and say, hello, this is my son that I sold for $10,000 50 years ago? So she never was able to meet him. She never brought herself to do so. But the postscript is that his brothers have embraced him, and in fact, when she passed away, they listed Billy in the obituary, which was redemption.
Yeah.
It's my favorite story because of the complexity of it, but it's also, there's nothing that shocks me anymore. In fact, when I talk about her, his biological mother, it's not out of shame or disdain. She did the best she could with where she was. And 90% of us, we're doing the best we can with where we are. Sometimes the choices we make have horrible consequences. And we've all been met with that fork in the road. And so I can't look at her and say, what a horrible person because you sold your son.
Right.
You're a single woman with 5 boys, and you're going home to West Virginia, and they don't want the black one. What do you do in 1964? So she did the best she could. So we rise up now, Billy, we rise up now, we call her blessed, because she did the best she could.
Yeah. I was talking with a young lady at an event a couple of days ago who said that she used the ancestry.com and found her dad. And she had mentioned her mom, and I had just asked, oh, could your mom have just told you? And she said yes, but she chose not to.
Yeah.
And so just knowing that, I think about the mental health part of that. Is that something GRAITH Foundation helps?
Absolutely.
support?
We do wraparound service, and in fact, I did not sign on to my DNA mystery until I was assured that everyone would get therapeutic services before, during, and after. I wouldn't do long lost family unless I was assured there was therapeutic services because, again, these are real lives. Mariah is sitting right there. She is not just a figure on television. She's a real life, and she lives with those choices that were made 28, 29 years ago every single day. You turn your TV off. She doesn't get to turn her TV off. So those wraparound services are essential, not just to those that are on television, but for those who I work with every single day.
That's wonderful. What are some of the things you're working on now?
Oh, God, so many things. So GRAITH Foundation is growing by leaps and bounds. After the TV show aired, we got inundated with phone calls, and so we're managing through all of those cases. I have 4 genealogists that work for the foundation as well, because I can't do it all myself, even though I really want to. I'm kind of a type A personality. I want to have those personal connections, but I can't to be effective. I'm writing another book. My book, there's actually 2 in the works right now. The first one is called Banneker. It's a story about a young man who's 17 years old, and he's charged with finding out and solving the greatest disease that's ever plagued mankind. It's a fascinating story that came about during COVID. I'm writing a sequel to Shelter in the Sun, which is a love story between 2 people in their 70s. Hello, goodbye. And so I'm writing that sequel.
Knows that I like, romance. They don't like romance as much as I do.
Listen, I'm so glad my mom is not here because I don't think she's read the book, but I tell you what, it's very, very dicey. There's a lot going on in Shelter in the Sun. We're not going to talk about ice cubes. We're not going to talk about it today, no ma'am. So I'm writing a sequel to that. I'm working with my daughters right now. My daughters have a company called B&O Co. B&O, Bethany and Olivia Company. And they're creating games for the culture. One of which is called Six and a Possible. Think of 5-second rule, but for African American people. Another one is called Draw or Gnaw, which is Pictionary, and that was born out of a family game night that we did, and we were playing Pictionary. And there was nothing of topics that they could relate to, so they said, Mom, we should do a game for us. And I was like, bing, again, connection, family game nights, that's what we're doing. So they're creating those. Yeah, still being a wife and still being a mom and trying to do the best I can every day.
Well, I love that. Is there something that you can share that people would be surprised to know about you?
I'm an introvert. I don't like to be in the front. I'm very much in the back, but for whatever reason, God keeps pushing me forward. And so now in my 50th year, I'll be 50 in October, I've just embraced the fact that I'm going to be in the front. And I need to be comfortable there. I enjoy talking to people about my experiences kind of on a private basis, but I'm fine with being in the front. I will no longer hide in the background.
Very good, very good.
Yeah.
If you could share with those of us who are still considering, you talked about it earlier, about researching history, knowing more. Could you encourage us with a word?
So I was driving down the street today, and I do this all the time. The most beautiful trees are those that have crooked branches. If you think about it, the trees that provide the most shade, the trees that are most interesting, the trees that are most fruitful are those with crooked branches and something hanging off over here and something hanging off over there. And our families look just like that. I think you need to get rid of the fear that you're going to have a straight lineal tree. Your family is complex, it's complicated, it's ugly, it's dark, it's beautiful, it's wonderful. And those roots that you have run really deep. Your ancestors deserve to be known. They deserve to be known. And so doing the research and finding out how you are, who you are, why you are, and the shoulders that you stand on is really your responsibility. There's no excuse now. Now for African American people, our roots, data-wise, end at a certain point. We have to rely on our European ancestors to help us guide, and sometimes we have to speculate. I tell a story about my husband's family. His second great-grandmother is a woman named Frances Nutt Bland. And on her father's will, she's listed as Frances $600. Below her name is a woman whose name is Old Millie $0, meaning having no wealth, no value at all. Below her name is Table, $50, Bureau, $125. And so that's as far as I can get on that line and that limb of his tree. But what does that do for me? I can remind my children when they don't want to do their math homework that Frances would have loved to get an education. She was 18 years old in 1862, and she was worth as much as the chair you're sitting on. So I'm going to need you to get your tail into a book, right? So even if it's a limited amount of information that you can get, it's enough. Because my children now know that they stand on the shoulders of Frances Nutt Bland, who, by the way, is an 18-year-old woman who was worth $600. And because of her, you are. And that therein lies the blessing. So I'm going to encourage everyone to dig deep into your tree. Find out who you come from, because we are here because of them. It's not because of you. We are here because of them.
Thank you. Let's take some questions. Yep, we have a question. Microphone.
One, two.
Hi, I'm Sharon Kirkland from Tabahani Book Circle.
Yes.
I have several questions. One, I'm going to just do two.
Sure.
One, when people are having health issues and they're like, well, we don't have that. What would be the best ancestral way to dig? Which one would we use? Because, it's like a heart attack here, or like myself, a Middle Eastern trait that came from nowhere, and I'm like, I'm not Middle Eastern, but maybe I am. And then number two, have you ever come across like how they're saying now in your in your lawyering, people who have taken a DNA test and have been found guilty because somebody else took the DNA test.
Yeah. So to answer your first question, in terms of the medical information, there's a couple of things. One, 23andMe does a really good job of identifying health traits. I think I just went in front of it. Identifying health traits. They're really good about that. The other thing that you can do is go and dig into your family tree. We do things at GRAITH Foundation called genograms. There are traits that we have, whether it's medical, relational, social, alcoholism, those things are genetic traits. You can see in my family there are certain traits, relational traits, that are consistent throughout our family tree. And so, two things. One, 23andMe for those health traits because they do a good job of it, but also dig into your family tree. For African American people, we probably will have heart disease or high blood pressure, and that's because of the high salt content that our people had to maintain to survive the Middle Passage. These are things that are just innately in us genetically, right? And so discovering your family tree and discovering the people in your tree is a good way to do it as well. In terms of the using DNA, those commercial sites to solve crimes, I can't tell you how many times I've been called on to help a police department or help a detective agency or a private investigator to try to identify people. I worked for the feds for 10 years, and I prosecuted crimes for 10 years. I don't want to be around crimes anymore because I was meeting people on their worst day every single day. People think it's noble work, and it is. It's necessary work. But I didn't want to meet people on their worst day every day. So I choose to use my powers in a different way, my gifts, my talents in a different way. That's not to poo-poo people who do it. It's just not my thing.
Well, one, the criminal is a victim also.
Indeed.
So to me, the criminal is a victim. And people, when you said that you want to know what happened to them, how did they get to this place? It's just that how were they victimized as such that they did come to now we're in a courtroom of a jury of someone else's peers.
For sure. And here's the thing. I've dealt with so many people and solved so many cases that, again, it's very difficult for me to judge people because all of us are a product of what happened to us. In fact, Oprah Winfrey wrote a book with a psychologist, and it's entitled, What Happened to You? It's never what you do. It's always what happened to you that causes you to do, behave, conduct yourself in a particular way. I used to do a program called The Grind, and it would take kids that were incarcerated, juveniles who were incarcerated for drug dealing, right? And I would put them in an environment of a corporation. And guess what? They would thrive. Why? Because the principles are exactly the same. The only difference is the environment and the access.
Yes.
So it's always about what happens to us.
Yeah.
It's never about what is. It's always about that.
Thank you.
Other
Yeah.
questions? Yeah. Any questions? Oh, you're waiting.
Well, I would comment on that.
Sure.
What you just said, because I wasn't a lawyer, but I dealt in law, and we were dealing with this case with a gang in Orange County, and I had access to the book with all of the monikers and everything, and the letters from jail, how they're coded and whatnot, and I always was like, oh my gosh, these people are so genius.
It's a brilliant mind.
And I was like, it is just a thin, like a thin blue line that they talk about, going right or going left.
Fork in the road.
And how their recruiting services, how they keep things going, their ranks. And people would look at me in the office like, what are you talking about? I was like, these people are brilliant.
Organized crime is called organized crime because it's organized. It's not called disorganized crime. It's very, very organized, and there's a hierarchy. There's a flow chart. There's Venn diagrams. There's all kinds of. So it's a very organized system. And so when I meet people, when I talk to people, even with my adult adoptees or anybody, I'm always keen to understand that I'm talking to what happened to you. You're talking to what happened to me. I told you. You asked me the question, how did I get here? 5th grade, Miss Martin. That's how I'm here. But for Miss Martin showing those videos and encouraging me to kind of explore, none of this happens. Those 1,600 people, perhaps another genealogist would have solved their case. Or not.
Yeah. Anybody out there ever used any of the DNA? Yeah. And were you pleased with the results that you got?
I did 23andMe quite some time ago. I did 23andMe quite some time ago. And yes, the things that it draws out of you, and you look at it immediately and are the health traits. You know, something as simple as you like salt versus sweet. You know, all these little minute things that you don't really think about. I've used Shelbi services in the past, and that's how I found my mother's side of the family. Because I was adopted from birth, so I absolutely had nothing to go on. Only my mother's name, which, by the way, I found in some papers when my mother passed away. She purposefully left my baby book in the middle of a drawer in her room because she knew I'd have to clean out her room. And that's the first introduction I had to knowing exactly who my mother's name was. But ancestry, I did my test last year just on a whim. And got an email back from a guy that says your DNA is showing up all over my family. So I know you're related to us. It's like it's showing up way at the top. So long story short, I started interacting with my father's side of the family, which I thought I would never, ever find. Because all I had was a name. And now I know that my father was one of 8. That I have a boatload of first cousins. We talk every month on Zoom, and believe it or not, even though I was the only one that was adopted, there's still things they don't know. And we have one last living sibling who's close to 90 years old. And so we're all dying to find out from her. So what do you remember? We actually had her on Zoom one Sunday. And she said, you know what, we never knew Charlie had any kids. And so, what she's saying, it just resonates so much with me because I have gone through a gyration of emotions about a lot of these things. But the joy of knowing and getting pictures and finding out that my youngest son looks exactly like his grandfather. Or looking at the Zoom pictures and finding out we all have very similar facial features, oval faces, and things of that nature. There's just nothing like that feeling. Now, granted, I was up in age before I found out any of these things, but there's really nothing like it. And you know what, I actually can say, as much as I feel I've accomplished in my own life, I finally feel whole. Because now I know, I have very limited knowledge on my mother's side. And even talking to my sister to this day, she's so right about, she is what she is today. And so much pain happened in her life that it's very difficult to talk about. The things I want to know from her is very hard to get. Because it forces her to relive things that I know nothing about. Because I wasn't there. And she's 10 years younger than me. So imagine being 53 years old, which is the age she was when she found out, that you have a sister that's 10 years older than you. You're like, where'd this come from? But our mother is gone. So, and as are all her sisters and her mother who could have probably filled in the blanks. They're all gone. But it's really nothing like it. And Shelbi, you and I have talked before, but I would like to really get more involved with your foundation.
Absolutely.
Because people sometimes need to hear from people who have been through that other side, so that they can actually get a reality check. My story is great on my father's side. It's not so happily ever after on my mother's side, because I'm at this juncture of my life, I'm not willing to take my sister through the pain and reliving some very painful things just so I can get the information. It's not worth it to me.
One of the best things about Janet's story, if you don't mind me telling you about lunch, she went to lunch with her sister and she calls me up from the car and she goes, "Oh my God, our hands are exactly the same." She's like, "We hold our hands exactly the same." She was freaking out and I'm like, that's kind of how genetics work. But it's like when you get to see yourself for the first time ever in the history of your life, it's just, I mean, it was an honor.
It's been an honor, and I almost feel like it's, now that I found my father's side, it's almost my time to care for.
Yeah, I get it.
Yeah.
You'll do it. We'll do it. It's a blessing.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
I want to ask the author.
Hey
I
there.
want to ask, I had some family business to take care of this morning.
Indeed.
So, but I had to make it here to be able to get a little of this wisdom and deliciousness, this juiciness. I want to ask you, as an author, what was, and you might have described this already and I might have missed it, so I apologize if this is redundant, but what was the most transformative experience that you had, or experiences that you had, going through this process of writing this book and this narrative? If you can explain that to us.
Yeah, so Shelter in the Sun was a thought when I was 17 years old. I know, it seems weird. I was at Fisk University and I thought, I've never seen a love story with old people. I've never seen a sex story with old people. And I thought, and then, I'm in my room and I'm like, who said that? Like, you know what I mean? It's like I'm freaking myself out. And I literally buried the idea because I thought that's bizarro for a 17-year-old to think about. Fast forward, I have a very good friend who manages a lot of my career, and she says, you seem like the type of person that should write books. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to write a book. She's like, you should write a book. And I'm like, I'm not going to write a book. And she said, well, do you have any ideas? And I said, well, I got this idea. 17 years old people, this is the whole sex thing. She's like, write the book. And I'm like, I'm not writing that book. My parents are still here. I am not writing that book. And she encouraged me to do so. The process of writing is like being naked in the middle of a room because it's your innermost thoughts on paper. And when you publish, it's like sending your kid to a daycare you haven't checked out, right? You don't know how they're going to be treated. You don't know if they're going to be loved or hated. You don't know if they're going to be abused. But you have to trust that it's what it is. This is my baby. And so for me, the hardest part was just putting the first page down and then getting into the headspace of my characters. I was telling you I'm writing a couple of books right now, but I cannot write them simultaneously. I cannot go from a 75-year-old woman to a 17-year-old boy. It would be disingenuous to both of those people. So when I'm Doris and I'm writing as Doris, I am Doris. I turn a red light in my office, hello, goodbye. I lay on the floor, and oftentimes I'll do a dictation or I'll have my laptop on. When I'm writing for Banneker, for Benjamin, I have music going, it's bright. Sometimes I'll have some of my teenagers come over and I'll just kind of ear hustle what their language is, and I incorporate that because I have to become that character. And then the publishing part of it, the hardest part of writing is editing. I don't want anybody to tell you it's the writing part, it's the editing part. Editing is painful because you don't realize how bad your grammar is until you have to write a book. And people are like, that is not where that apostrophe goes. And I'm like, it is from 5th grade. I thought Miss Martin had said. You don't know what a semicolon looks like, so you just hire an editor. You don't do it yourself because you'll screw it up. But the publishing part is really nerve-wracking, to put your baby out there and to wait to see what people think. And then you just get over it. Because much like your kids, you just put them out in the world and you say, do the best you can. I did the best I could. I do the best you can. And so that's the hard part. But once you've done one, you do 2, and you do 3, and then you do 5, right? And then you just do what you have to do, and you put it out in the world. I do think it's really important, however, that if you have a book in you, write the book. Write the book. Write the book. And the reason you write the book is because somebody else needs to hear your story. I can't tell you, Miss Williams and my mom were supposed to be here. Julietta Williams, who's a friend of my mother's, she has a boyfriend. She wouldn't mind me saying that because she tells everybody she has a boyfriend, and she's 80-something years old. When I wrote the book, she read the book and she called me and said, if you need pointers for the next one. And I was like, I don't want to know. I don't want to do that. I don't want any pointers. But I'm going to tell you something, for an 80-some-odd-year-old woman to say thank you for telling a story and to say that it's okay to have intimacy in my octogenarian years, hello, good, like, it was wonderful. Uncomfortable, but wonderful. right? So that story resonated with people, but everybody, if you feel like there's a prompting to write the book, please write the book. There's enough stories out there for people, but your story matters just like anybody else's.
Thank you. I have one more question, and
Sure.
that would be flipping over to the genealogy side.
Yeah.
And I've heard good things, and I don't know anything about it because I haven't done the research on it, but I've heard good things about, I think it's called African ancestry.
Yeah, we talked about it.
Did you talk about it?
Yeah.
I missed it, so
Yeah.
I can get with you later. So you
Dr.
can
Gina Page, wonderful. And the one thing I wanted to say about African ancestry, one of the things that Dr. Page does is not only does she give you the information, but they also take excursions to your place, to your people. And so, for example, if you are Yoruba, they do an excursion. They will take you to your place, and you will meet your people. And from what I understand, we'll be going, my kids and my husband are going to Africa in November for a different reason, but I'm going to the place. And from what I understand, it is transformative because for us, it's gone in the Atlantic Ocean. We have no idea what our language was. We don't know because it was all stripped from us. But when you go on the soil and you see the faces that look like your faces and you know that your blood is their blood, there's something transformative that happens.
Yeah.
Much like Janet was saying, even with the adult adoptees, when you know that that's who you come from, it's freeing. It's freeing. It's no more guessing. I had a client just recently say, every time I go in the grocery store, I wonder, is that her? Is that him? And it's subconscious.
Yeah.
You don't. It's not something you wake up with and say, I'm going to think about whether or not this is my birthday. It's subconscious. It's always kind of looming in the background. But once you know, I tell my clients, the truth may not make you happy. The truth may not make you whole, but the truth will make you free.
Yeah.
And that's really where it lies in all of these stories, these connections with people.
Right.
It's freedom.
Yeah.
It's freedom. When you connect yourself to yourself or to another, that is where your freedom lies. And that, frankly, is what biblically we're supposed to do anyway. Do unto others that which is done unto you. It's the golden rule. Connect. Tell your story.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, that was a question.
Hi, it's for both the genealogy and the DNA. With your research, have you considered having some kind of a pool, especially for the health part?
Yeah.
Because a lot of people know I went through a stem cell transplant a year ago. And the first thing that the doctors told me was it was going to be very difficult for me, number one, because I was biracial, but mainly because I was African American.
Yeah.
And he said, even though we're going to put you in, this is City of Hope, even though we're going to put you in this pool to see what we can find, because a lot of times your relatives are not a match.
Right.
My story was wonderful because I had one brother and he was 100% match, but that was like they said, miraculous. It just doesn't happen.
Yeah.
So, in your research or in your GRAITH, is that something that you guys do or are trying to do? Because I just think it was just for the doctor to say that to me.
Yeah.
He just said, it's going to be really hard because you are, even if you were just all African American, there's so much in your DNA that is so different in so many other different races, and then now you know that you're African American and Mexican American.
So for the foundation, no, but for other testing sites, yes. Testing sites are getting very sophisticated and understanding the depth and breadth of DNA. You all remember the first time you ever heard DNA was the OJ case, and it was very high level, 30,000 foot view look at DNA. It has been drilled down so specifically, and there's technology happening every single day with DNA. I think it's going to make it better for not just the work that I do from a social standpoint, but from a medical standpoint. Stem cell is something, if you said that 10 years ago, people would be like, are you talking about a plant? What are we talking about?
Yeah.
They wouldn't know what that is. And so we just have to, so technology has to catch up. That's always how it is that, law has to catch up. Technology moves very quick. You went from Facebook to Instagram to TikTok to Meta to Threads in 45 minutes, right? Technology is always moving fast. Medical science slows up a little bit. Law, much, much slower. So I think from a technology standpoint and these testing sites, they're going to become even more sophisticated in using DNA to help the medical community figure things out. But it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time. I think it's much like we talked about earlier with DNA being the 30,000 foot view 10 years ago, where we just like, you're Caucasian, you're black. That's not drilled down enough. The more usership you get, the more donors you get, the better the technology will become and the better the matches will happen.
there's also a trust issue.
For sure.
Like for instance, with her story,
For sure.
10 years ago, my daughter was a Girl Scout, and I was like, oh, do your gold award on DNA swabs because somebody in the water polo community died because the bone marrow couldn't get the match. And I was like, and remember Rod Caruso's daughter?
Yeah.
And I was like, there's so many of us like that. But because of the trust issue,
For sure.
people are like, I don't think so.
Yeah.
I don't think
Yeah,
so.
I can tell you weekly I get a discussion on the Tuskegee experiment, at least weekly, right? Because that is a historical issue. And I think there's validity, there is validity to it. I think the point is that you have to weigh the cost benefit, risk reward. Everything we do is calculated. Everything we do is, here comes the mom. Here comes the mom. But everything we do has a risk to it, and everything we do has a reward to it. For my DNA clients, it was worth it. It's worth it. Because if you don't know where you get your eyes from, or you don't know where you get your hands from, or you don't know anything, it's very difficult to live. You can do it, but it's not necessarily what you want to do.
I do have a comment for you. You could use it as a side character.
Sure.
We've invested and we've moved into a 55 plus community.
Nice.
And my neighbor is 70 something, and she told me just sitting out on the sidewalk one day that she's getting a boob job, but COVID messed her up because she feels she has one more husband left in her, and she needs to get a boob job.
Listen, separate. Listen.
Yeah, so you can use that if you want to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know what's so funny to me? I was looking at pictures of my great-grandmother, my dad's grandmother, when she was 50. And she looked 90. And I'm about to be 50. And I was like, ain't no way Money was going to wear this dress with these shoes and this. Like, it just, because what was old then is not old now. The woman who just walked in the door, these women are in their 80s. Hello? Are you seeing what I'm seeing? Like, so that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing. So 80 is not what 80 used to be, just like 76 is not what it used to be. So that's the reason I wrote that book, because I wanted to encourage people of that age bracket to realize it's okay. You don't get forgotten. You don't have to hang up the towel. You can love and live and feel good about yourself, find your womanhood or your manhood again. It's cool. In fact, there's a scene in the book that I wrote about Doris where she's in the shower and she sees her body. And the way she sees it in the initial piece is that her breasts were only used to feed her children. That her body was not her own. And then throughout the book, she discovers, oh, wait a minute now. This body is not just for them, it's for me. And she discovers herself all over again as a woman, and not just, and I say just with an asterisk, a wife and a mother. That she is herself first. And she has to go through that process. Now, Glenn helps her with an ice cube. But bottom line is, that's what the book is all about, for that discovery, that you don't have to be washed up.
Did everybody get their opportunity ticket? Because somebody's getting ready to win a copy of that book. We have that. We have three. We have three. So did everybody get a little blue ticket? Andre, will you bring
Now,
me
wait, can I just say this? My mother cannot get a copy of this
Mama
book.
can't have it.
She's not allowed to read the book. Good Lord. I'm glad the book discussion happened before she got here.
Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Good question.
Oh, we have one in the back. Andre.
Oh, my girl.
Hi.
That's Mariah, guys.
Hi, Mariah.
Don't make me cry.
I'm not going to make you cry,
I'm on
please.
the edge. So after I figured out who both my parents were, I actually did egg donation, and this next cycle I get to meet the result of my egg donation. But my question is, I know, it's like very full circle, it's very weird. But my question is, how many clients do you see from egg donation? Do you anticipate seeing more, and what do you think about egg donation ethically? Because it was a whole lot of layers for me deciding to do that. I think ultimately the decision I made, was yes, because I know that I'm contributing to parents who really want these kids and will make excellent adults.
Yeah.
And that was my take on it, but I wanted to know what your take on
Yeah,
it
talk
was.
about egg donation.
So I've had a lot of egg donation cases, and I've had a lot of sperm donation cases. Most of my sperm donor cases are doctors, period, point blank. That just is what it is. So when I have birth mothers who or children who come to me and they say they are looking for their birth parent, and we discover that bio dad is their biological father, and I tell them, I said, you want to bet me $500? Like, for what? I said, your dad's a doctor. It's like, there's no way my dad's a doctor. Inevitably. 99.9% of the time, they're doctors. Why? Because when women go into a sperm bank, what do you want? Doctor or lawyer, right? Most sperm banks are near medical schools. Why? Because you get paid for donating sperm. Doctors need money in medical school. It's just kind of one of those things. In terms of egg donation, it's a newer phenomenon than sperm donation, but I think that it's an interesting thing. It's an interesting thing to participate in, and I'm really glad that you're doing that. I'm glad you did that, because life is life is life, and if you can provide life, sustain life, hold life, you'll rise up and be blessed.
Yeah.
And you're creating a whole new generation of people that are connecting one to another, and that's important stuff, Mary. That's important stuff.
We have time for one more question, and then we'll do some giveaways. Yes,
Yeah.
one question right here.
So getting back to the questions that Maria raised about, be the match and
Yeah.
the difficulties involved, I was just wondering, do you think that if more people participated in African ancestry, where you can really get down to where your actual origin
Yeah.
is from, that could assist in maybe, if nothing else, doing a process of elimination in terms of where you would go? Because then that's additional information for someone to say, well, okay, if you're from this area, tribe, area, culture,
For sure.
this individual is also from that and they could use your help. And then narrowing down the scope of people who would even be interested in getting tested.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So that's the blessing of African ancestry, and what Dr. Page is doing. It's extraordinary because it's not just informational. It really is because our history was dead, it died, and there is no connection between. So she always says it's coast to coast. Somewhere in the middle, it all disappears. You know one coast, and you know the other coast, but the connection between the middle passage, if you will, it disappeared. And so what we're trying to do is bridge the gap between the Atlantic coast on both sides and the continent, right? But I do think you're right with African ancestry. I think one of the things they're really adamant about not doing, and that is utilizing the DNA of their donors for any other reason than to identify. And it's because of what you said, which is this whole speculative, being very, kind of cautious about our DNA being exposed for all of the historical reasons that we know. So their website is very clear that this will only be used for these purposes. Never will it be used anywhere else. Never will it be sold anywhere else. Never will it be taken anywhere else. So I think there's a benefit to that. Whether or not they move into a different arena from a medical standpoint, I'm not sure. Just because I know her stance on it, that it's for this purpose and this purpose only, is to bridge those two gaps. But I think there's other opportunities out there. And I think 23andMe is doing a really good job of making sure that those health histories, because that's a new phenomenon too. I think in the last 5 or 10 years, 5 years probably, that they've incorporated the health piece of it. Their usership has increased because of that. Because they already knew that ancestry was, the big daddy, the granddaddy of them all. So they had to incorporate something else. And I think that health piece is really going to be the catalyst for these questions as Maria was talking about.
So you think that we should, as African Americans, should do both?
Yeah.
We should do both, do 23andMe and do the African
Correct.
American.
Correct.
Yeah.
And if you're a person who does not have parentage or has unknown parentage, use Ancestry, because the usership is so vast. You will find cousins that you didn't know existed. I had a client, she wasn't even a client, she was a friend, and she's like, hey girl, I need to talk to you real quick. And I said, okay. I got this Ancestry test, and I did it, and it says I have a half brother. And I was like, okay. And she said, but I have a brother, but what's a half brother? I said, well. What that means is one of your parents has a child that is not with the other parent. She's like, well, what does that mean? I was like, well, and so I had to, like, she was like, wait a minute. And so she says, well, this guy is from whatever city it was. And I said, okay. And she says, but my mom is from here, but my dad is from there. And I was like, well. And so it was a whole to-do.
Yeah.
So what does that do? It opens up a can of worms, too.
Yeah.
It's Pandora's box. So be careful. Because information is information,
Yeah.
good or bad. But, you know, it is what it is. Again, the most beautiful trees are the crooked branches with the crooked branches. It's not always going to be straight and perfect.
Let's thank Shelbi for her time. So fast. Thank you so much for being here.
So much fun.
And I know, would you be able to stay around just for a little
Absolutely.
bit after?
Absolutely.
And then for the 3 books that you give away, will you sign them?
1,000% I will sign them.
And then the other thing we talked about.
Oh,
Yes.
I have to get addresses for.
Okay.
There's